Hello and welcome back to Legendary Leaders. I am so glad you are here today because this episode is one that stayed with me long after the recording ended. My guest is the inspirational Kate Grant, CEO of the Fistula Foundation and the author of the memoir No Women Left Behind, a book that takes us into some of the most overlooked corners of the world and the lives of women who've suffered deeply, simply because they gave birth without access to safe medical care. Obstetric fistula is a childbirth injury that leaves women incontinent, often shunned by their communities and forced to live in isolation. It's a condition that should no longer exist, yet it still affects at least 1 million women, mostly in the most underserved regions of Africa and Asia. What Kate and her team have done through the Fistula Foundation is extraordinary, and just talking about it literally gives me goosebumps. They've helped over 100,000 women receive life-changing surgeries without government funding and through the power of individual action and collective will. It's a story of fierce compassion, smart leadership, and a refusal to look away. Man, do we need a little bit more of that in our world. What I found most powerful in our conversation wasn't just the scale of her impact, but the depth of her commitment, the passion that she shows, and the honesty with which she talks about leadership, about walking away from a successful career in advertising, and about the slow, challenging work of building something that truly lasts. This episode is not just about maternal health. It's about courage. It's about listening to stories that rarely get told. And it's about how purpose and action, when combined, can change lives, one woman at a time. So before we dive in, I'd love to leave you with a question. When was the last time you truly paid attention to something happening far beyond your immediate world and let it move you to act? Let's get into it. And if this episode sparks something in you, whether you are navigating change, building something with heart, or leading a team, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me directly at leaderspace@CathleenO'Sullivan.com, or if you're a scale-up tech leader, get in touch at Kathleen@moji.co, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Hello and welcome back, Kate. It's so good to see you again.
Oh, it's great to be here, Kathleen. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I was looking forward to it, and I have to admit, and I haven't quite gotten to the bottom of it yet. Every time I was thinking about recording with you tonight, I got a bit emotional.
Really?
Yes, really. Now, as many people know who have read about me, have been on my website or worked with me or friends, I can get emotional pretty quickly. So it's not a hard thing to do. However, having said that, even our short pre-conversation triggered curiosity paired with real light bulb moments. Because after we spoke, I read more about the topic that you are supporting, that you are writing in your book about. And I was shocked. I was in disbelief. I still can't believe that I have never heard about that illness in particular we are going to delve into in a moment. So I'm feeling quite humble and fragile.
Okay, well noted. I'll try to be appropriate so I don't trigger a too big of a flood of emotion from you. But it's interesting, the issue that I focused the last 20 years of my life on is obstetric fistula, which is a childbirth injury. And for those who don't know what that is, it's basically the result of unrelieved obstructed labor. Like if you're delivering a baby in a reasonably well-off country and your labor is obstructed, in other words, you fully dilated, you've been pushing, and the baby's not going anywhere, you'll get a C-section. And C-sections in most places these days are as safe a procedure as a vaginal delivery. So you're very likely to end up with, a healthy child, assuming there was no other issues. And you will too. You'll have a C-section stitches, but usually the ending is good. The same is not true for women in poor parts of Asia and Africa who don't have access to emergency obstetric care. So will stay in labor for days. The pressure of the baby's head on the pelvis, not going anywhere, cuts off oxygenated blood. And this is the hard part for anybody listening, that lack of oxygenated blood kills tissue. If you think about frostbite, what it causes frostbite, in Canada, it's slag, the things freeze and you're not getting oxygenated blood to a nose or a finger, whatever it is. For this, injury, it's tissues in the vagina, bladder, sometimes rectum, that end up not getting an oxygenated blood, and tissue dies when it doesn't get oxygenated blood. And so the injury is caused by, again, unrelieved obstructed labor that produces these holes, and the holes produce incontinence as waste leaks through those holes. And that's really, really brutal. But the good news is about 90% of the time, a trained surgeon can go in and sew those holes up and take a woman from not just incontinent, but often outcast in her community and give her back her life. And I think what you're saying a second ago, Kathleen, about triggering sort of, a sense of almost vulnerability, I can completely relate to that, because I think any woman who's ever had a baby, when have you ever felt more vulnerable than when, your legs are in stirrups or whatever it is? You're trying to deliver a baby, you're exhausted and in pain potentially, or if not in pain, you've had an epidural or something, and you're bringing new life in the world, particularly your first birth. That's a very, in some ways, anxiety producing, of course, exciting, if the birth is healthy, but that process is very fraught. And if you think about this young woman who heads into it with the same sense of anticipation, excitement you and I would have, but instead ends up days later with usually a stillborn child. So you've got that devastation, then this horrendous injury. And since she's not delivering in a hospital, she just goes to sleep and she's hoping it's going to heal itself. And of course it doesn't. And often, and actually normatively, it's years before she gets treatment. Now, if for some reason this happened in the US or in Canada, she would likely be treated. She would have been brought to the hospital probably eventually and would have gotten treatment probably before she left, as opposed to, suffering kind of needlessly, for an extended period of time. So that's been my work the last 20 years. And we partner with hospitals in 35 countries, some really heroic doctors who I have deep admiration for, helping women. And then we've got some amazing supporters who fund that. And the organization I run, Fistula Foundation, is really simply a bridge between these amazing doctors and these women who need help, and then caring people who want to help make that possible.
And I admire you for everything you do. We will be delving into what it is Kate does together with all of her partners in crime here, and how she offers this support for hundreds of thousands of women, and probably more to come, far more to come, while raising awareness around fistula and also going through your own journey of growth and development. So I think that also is a part that feels vulnerable. One of those light bulb moments, I had many researching your work and fistula in particular, because I hadn't heard about it before I met you, was that the last hospital treating it in the US closed in 85. So it was also a Western.
Right. It closed in I should know the exact year, and I'm afraid I don't, but in the 1890s in the US, in Manhattan, obviously not Manhattan, well, it is Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, that's part of the city of New York, obviously the biggest city in the US. There was a hospital where the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, that big luxurious hotel, sits on the Upper East Side, and it was closed in the 1890s. So yes, this injury used to impact women here. So what changed? Well, emergency obstetric care, C-sections, forceps deliveries, that, basically relieved that obstructed labor that created fistula. So the same, though, unfortunately, is not true in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa and the poorest corners of Asia. Here, just sort of basic statistics. In the US, there's roughly one doctor for every, not quite 400 people, but just broad numbers. In sub-Saharan Africa, the ratio is closer, depending on the country, for one doctor for every 5,000 to 10,000 people. Wow. And if you think about that, it really helps you see, I think, the lack of doctors and resources that would help this woman in labor get the care she needed. So to a certain degree, fistula is a symptom of bigger, deeper problems: poverty, and basically how, if you're a woman or a girl, that poverty often affects you worse than it does men or boys. As Justin Trudeau said, poverty is sexist. And you can look at the data, and that could be calories consumed a day for a girl versus a boy. It could be years of schooling for a boy versus a girl. And so when you think about what's the most perilous thing most females will ever engage in, it's delivering a child. And I think there's gender discrimination written on the fact that women don't get what they need. Now, obviously, there's this huge problem with not enough supply of doctors. But within that, there's still resource allocations that are made such that I would argue women aren't getting what they need. And to a certain degree, Fistula Foundation treats that symptom. Now, I find that very compelling because there's at least 1 million women suffering needlessly for something that we can fix. This isn't an illness we don't have treatment for. It isn't that. It's not a disabling, well, it is a disabling injury, but it's not one that can't be fixed. Most of the time it can. And so that propels me and our team forward, knowing that there's sort of needless suffering, but there's a solution. And that's sort of what we focus on.
Let's recap a few things, right? And you let me know if I got it wrong. But the way I imagine it is, there is a woman who is potentially for a prolonged period of time in labor.
Yes.
Potentially painful labor without medical support that could end, and in many cases can end or ended in child death, stillbirth. Then there is obviously the injury for many women occurring, and they don't get treatment. So 2. There's a third part, and that is the one I get goosebumps just thinking about it, and that's not the good goosebumps. What happens to women when they have, or when they are not being treated?
Yeah,
and incontinence is happening and whatnot.
Yeah, I love the way you framed this. I mean, the thing is, women have been delivering babies, for as long as humans have been around, most of that time without medical help. So most births, even ones that happen at home, can be safe. So it isn't that most of them end up with a dead child or most of them end up with a fistula. Thankfully, that doesn't happen. But when you do need intervention, it's not there. You can end up with stillborn children. You can end up also with a worse outcome than a fistula, which is a mom dies. Her uterus ruptures. She ends up with sepsis, which is basically, infection that kills her. I mean, there's other things that can happen that are even worse than a fistula. But you're right. So fistula is bad and it is treatable. But most women, for every woman we treat, there's at least 10 that haven't been treated. I mean, they're still out there suffering. And I think this is also important. If you or I were incontinent now, and there are people that are, men suffer incontinence from prostate, surgery and the like. Women have stress incontinence. Sometimes it can't be treated from childbirth or just aging. And there are people that are incontinent for, injuries or whatever. And that can be, again, a hard situation to have. But in a well-off country, it's manageable because you have these things that a woman in a dirt-floored hut in sub-Saharan Africa doesn't have. Let's start with depend pads or adult diapers that you can wear, that you can change, that prevent you from basically sitting in your own waste. I mean, sitting in it, but you're able to contain that. We also, most of us have more clothes than we ever wear. Don't most of us go to the Goodwill or the Salvation Army or whoever collects, clothing once a year, guilt filled with a bag full of stuff that you don't wear that's basically pretty good. For one in a developing country, a poor part of a developing country, she doesn't have that closet full of chores, that dresser full. She just maybe has a few things. And so when they become soiled, that's a problem because she also doesn't have a washing machine to wash it in. Which he has is a stream or a well that's a mile or however long away it is. So she also doesn't have hot and running water like we would to be able to bathe ourselves frequently if we felt we were unclean. So what does that mean for her then in her life? Well, what is often the case, and this is the brutal, brutal part about it, is she's often then ostracized because if you think about a dirt floor, this is not a forgiving surface for any kind of a spill. The soil absorbs whatever's been spilled. And if that's your waste, that's, again, not a forgiving surface. So often these women are ostracized, partly because they smell, and also because if you think about an environment where maybe others have not seen this injury, if it roughly affects 1 in 500 women, it's entirely possible in your village, there's nobody that's had this injury. And so what too often happens, we hear anecdotally, is a woman almost is blamed. This is your problem. You're cursed. You did something to create this injury. Not that maybe you were undernourished as a girl child, so your pelvis is too small and you didn't have emergency obstetric care and you lost your baby. And it's so not your fault. So if you think about back to the tenderness of heart, think about the hardest times any of us have ever gone through. I think about like my divorce or the death of my parents. What gets you through those times? the love of other people,
Mm.
the sense that you're not alone, the comfort of the people that care for you. And so with these women at a time when what they need is to feel loved, they're often demonized. So the layers of misery here beyond just the physiological suffering are just heartbreaking. But again, that's what keeps me at this, because I've traveled extensively in the last 20 years, part of my job. I mean, just to go, and I've met so many of these women, and the joy, that's not even an inaccurate word, it's just not strong enough, that they have for like the new life they have with the surgery. And that's not just the physical healing, it's the psychological healing that goes with being able to then socialize. And many countries in Africa are more, I say, collectivist in nature. Community is very important. They're not so individualistic like we are in the US. And if you think about that being a core value, the importance of community, and then you're ostracized from that community, the sense of sort of wound is just so profound. Now, the good news is, though, with surgery, that usually, surgery fixes that problem.
You were talking about, that you're supporting many, many women together with fabulous doctors. I hope you have seen many examples of women recovering, getting back to strength. First part of the question is, what's one of those stories that really makes our heart heat up right away? And the second part is about what's the impact all of these success stories, quote unquote, have on you?
Yeah, there's so many stories. I wrote about one of them in the book, and I'll recall it mostly because it's still powerful to me and always will be. I was in Kenya, and the person was running our program in the country said, I want you to come meet a woman because she wants to meet you. Mwatentena is her name. And I said, okay, let's go. And we get in the car, we drive about 40 miles from the hospital where she was treated, and another maybe mile and a half tops on a sort of, it was this dirt road. It almost felt like a walking path because it had a lot of potholes, but it wasn't that far off the main road. And we meet her, and she can't contain her joy. She is, at that point, roughly 55. I can't remember exactly, but I should, but she was in her 50s, and she'd had the injury for 30 years. Her husband had stayed with her, which is unusual. And he was actually there too. And his face would twinkle. And as he talked about how he'd always loved her and she was such a beauty, and when they were younger, and she was injured on the birth of her third child and she knew there was something wrong. It just wasn't like the previous deliveries, but she's again in this hut. They're 10 miles from a health clinic, and it's raining, and she goes on a bicycle for 10 miles in the rain, and finally, is seen but too late, delivers a stillborn child, and then has this fistula, but for 30 years. And then finally, her husband is in like the local town and hears an announcement about there being treatment for women with this condition. And she had some heartbreaking stories about how she'd been ostracized in her community. How she and her husband originally tried to keep it secret, but then word leaked out and friends just disowned her. It was heartbreaking. But the thing is that day when I went to see her, her joy was just, she couldn't even contain it. She kept hugging me. And, we'd sit down and start talking, and then she would go, let's dance, and then she'd hug me again and say, thank you. And initially I felt very uncomfortable because I hadn't done her surgery. Like, this is my job. Do you know what I mean? I'm not some hero. I'm not the one that's operating on her. And it felt like a sort of an attribution error. Like I was taking credit for something that I hadn't done, somehow she'd been told, oh, this woman is the one who'd done this. And I'm like, no, it felt like I was taking credit for something that was not right. And then something inside me clicked, and I thought, I need to be gracious and share her joy, like get over my own like boundaries. And this isn't mine, and something like that. This for this woman, I'm the person that helped this happen. And indirectly, I'm part of a chain of love, but I'm not the surgeon, but I thought I just have to go with this. And so then we're dancing and, in her little hut, and she'd actually moved all of her belongings out so that a couple of neighbors, because it's a very small place, it's kind of dark. So the basically one little window, and then the doorway, not a door, but just a doorway that let light in. And then we're getting ready to leave. And all I'd seen in front of their little dwelling was some kind of corn stalks that looked like they needed a good watering, and then a couple scrawny chickens. And I turn around to leave and say goodbye, and she's got one of the chickens, and she's thanking me by giving me one of her chickens. Now, of course, I'm extremely practical. What am I going to do with a chicken? Nothing. I mean, I don't need a chicken. And I don't live here. It seems so impractical. Again, I'm a very practical person. Like, don't give me the chicken. You're really poor. You need your chicken. But a person that was working for us, who's Kenyan, whispered in my ears, "Take the chicken." And I thought, okay, back to being gracious. I took the chicken, and we regifted it later at a meeting with survivors fistula support group, and we did a kind of drawing and gave the chicken. Somebody was very happy to get the chicken, but and then I was back a year later and in the just sort of general area, and I've got another picture of her smiling again. And she's like, "Oh, Kate's back in the area." She came on foot to see me. And again, there's an attribution error in there, and that I do this, but I didn't. The people that did the medical care for her deserve the credit, but I still can see her smiling face, and you just know, 30 years. She just said, "It feels like a miracle every day I wake up and my bed's dry." And then you think about that and think about, I sometimes at this age, I have to get up and pee in the middle of the night. I'm always like, oh God, get up, go, in a way you didn't when you were 20. But you think about it and think, but I don't wake up wet in the morning. If every morning you woke up and, you're awake, and one of the things you notice in that sort of morning as the light sort of filters in, that you are wet, what that would feel like every day. So yeah, that's would feel miserable. The amazing thing is her husband stick with her. That's
Yeah.
not normative, but we do see it. It's not like it never happens. There's, 100,000 more stories, just not just like that. Every woman has her own story. Her suffering is unique and her own, and no two are the same. But I would say the core of it is that surgery really does give them a sort of a new lease on life. And, there's a term in international development, foreign aid, about sustainable development. The basic idea of don't give somebody a fish, teach them how to fish. In other words, don't just, bring in things that, that then people don't figure out somehow how to provide what it is the donor is paying for. We provide sustainable development one woman at a time as they walk out of an operating room. That's what our model looks like. And yes, it'd be great if governments step forward and want to fund this, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. Why? Because the patients are usually poor women in places where poor women don't have political power.
There are quite a few points to go a little bit deeper
Yeah.
into. Funding is one of them. So if I don't mention it and I forget about it in my little foggy brain, you remind me of it because it is important. Want to come back to the husbands. So you said it is normative that the husband actually stays with the woman, and sometimes
no, it's not. It's actually normative. It's hard to say normative anyway, because there's so many different situations. But it's more normal for the husband not to stay than to stay. And often what you'll see is a woman comes in for treatment and she's got a sister or a mother or brother or somebody like that, some part of the family that maybe will come with her. And sometimes it is the husband, but it's also not at all unusual. This isn't always on the first birth. The example I just gave you, it wasn't her first child. But what's more normal is it is a first child, because if that pelvis is too small, again, for the size of the baby's head, you're more likely to find that on the first birth. Again, it happens on other births, but it's more likely on a first birth. And if you think about sort of two young people getting married, and maybe not having that much time together before that baby's born, and that young man is like, I didn't sign up for an incontinent wife. I mean, I can understand it. I'm not saying I embrace it or applaud it, but I can understand it.
Now, what happens then to the women? Because I can imagine sometimes they may not have a family member nearby or sticking with them. Just to give you a bit of context, and you cannot compare my example with any of these women examples, but my son was born like in a very speedy birth. And what I received, given that it was literally a minefield, an explosion, the way he came out when he was born, was the best support I could get.
Yeah.
The love around me, even though it was the pandemic, but there were a few people who could be there. And then there were nurses looking after you, stitching you, making sure you're going to be okay, right? And yet for me, it took a few months to get really back on track. I had sometimes the sense of shame in me that I haven't healed enough yet. I'm still in pain. Not everything is working properly. And I can call it shame. Now, I can't even imagine these women because I haven't even gotten close to where they are. But shame is something that
Well,
comes to mind for
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. Shame. And also the thing is that not knowing what's even causing the problem. I mean, I've heard this story so many times is, having given birth, yes, they get the placenta out. And yes, most of your leakage, if you will, for lack of a better, noun, it goes away, but not immediately. You're still wearing pads, days after labor, because there's just, at least I was, I mean, maybe not that you need them changed all the time like you're incontinent, but some amount of that is sort of normal. Yet, like for these women, there's that sense of, well, if I sit down, I've heard this so many times, if I just lie here, this will heal.
Mm.
In other words, I somehow that they have agency over it. And if they just do this, it will stop. And then obviously days, weeks go by and it hasn't stopped. Now, if they got in to see a trained doctor who's able to do a strong pelvic exam, is able to see what's creating the problem, even if they can't fix it, at least they've said, oh, see, you were in labor for a long time, weren't you? Yeah, yeah, I was in labor for 3 days. So this is what happened to you. There's holes there that was created because this baby's head cut off the blood supply, and you need to get to a hospital with a trained surgeon that heal those. Okay, then she knows what's caused it and what the treatment is. But often what she gets is she doesn't see a doctor. She sees somebody with much more basic training. They don't know exactly what's causing the problem or even necessarily how to fix it. Then she'll just go home to be like, I was told they can't help me. I mean, if for a woman who maybe is illiterate or has few resources, even getting to a facility that's not, down the street, a car or anything like that, that's also that sort of suffering without necessarily knowledge of what is needed to fix you. Not because people are withholding the truth, they just don't know it. And I think over time, as we're doing more surgeries in countries where we're doing much more outreach, many more hospitals, over time, I think that reality is starting to change for women so that they're more likely to be told, oh, you have this, it is treatable, but we can't treat it. At least then it's treatable, and the next step is to find who can treat it. But I think too often, the other thing is, and there's not, the evidence is anecdotal, but it somehow makes some, intuitively makes some sense, which is if that injury hasn't been seen very often, and I was saying at the beginning, in a village, and it's easier to sort of put that as this happened to you because of something you did. In other words, you're sort of cursed or you somehow brought this upon yourself,
Yeah.
because why don't all these other women have this? It's somehow you, back to the shame, you. And at least with you, your situation, you had knowledge of what was creating it. It didn't mean that
Mm.
emotionally you still didn't feel bad or somehow you're not healing. And I don't care. I've said this in the book. I don't care whether you're in New Delhi or New York. Nobody talks about incontinence and vaginas and rectums and stuff. It's those down there problems that
Yeah.
cross culturally, are an issue. We had a woman working for us and she would, some of the things, she doesn't work with us anymore. She's a nice enough woman, but she'd keep referring to the vagina as the birth canal. And I'm like, like somehow euphemistically. And I said, no, it's called a vagina because it's also a sex canal. I mean, yes, babies come out of there, but other things go in there. I mean, it was this idea that somehow we needed to just make it somehow something. And I'm like, no, it's an organ and it has a purpose, and this is the purpose. And we
Mm.
we just need to be able to talk about that.
Mm.
Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question.
Somewhat did. I think the part that I also want to get to is, what about those women who feel the shame, who haven't quite figured out what's going on there, who are being excluded from their small, larger communities? The husbands aren't there anymore. And there
Yeah.
you are, not
Yeah,
being
there we
able.
are. Well, one of the things that we've done, and not to get too into the strategy, the Fistula Foundation, but we originally started funding individual hospitals that have catchment areas, basically the area around the hospital that treats a population. But about 11 and a half years ago, we launched something called the Fistula Treatment Network in Kenya, where the ambition is really to end fistula, at least the way for fistula treatment, country by country. So we now have a program in Kenya. We have one in Zambia. We have one in Tanzania. We have one in DRC. We're probably going to start one next year or late this year in Nigeria. And how that sort of addresses your question is one of the things that we invest heavily in those FFTNs, those Fistula Treatment Network countries, is outreach. So that woman that I mentioned a while ago, Mwantena in Kenya, I mean, the reason that after 30 years of suffering, she finally got treatment is we were investing in outreach. We had an 800 number. We had, radio ads. We had community health workers that were getting the word out that treatment was available. So as we've had more resources, we've moved into doing more outreach to find patients and not find them, but somewhat to let them create awareness that surgery is available. We've invested in community health workers that will go out and do basic screening on women. Sometimes they end up finding out that the incontinence is caused by something other than fistula, but do sort of basic screening to get women in for treatment. So I see that as being a way forward. Now that can be resource intensive because you pay health workers, don't do it for free. You pay for radio ads and things like that. And we are investing more in that. But at the same time, if you only have X dollars and you can get a woman who's already waiting treatment, you'll do that before you put it into, some of these outreach things. Again, that said, we've got 4 and we're going to add a 5th country where we're moving forward to do more ambitious country by country outreach.
Now, that requires support. That requires to engage a team around you that you can trust, that lives the ethos of the foundation, that you can work with, and having the entrepreneurial spirit at the same time as well. Because as you said, you're not government funded. So how did you go about building that foundation and growing it?
Well, we're, an overnight success, 20 years in the making. We started out when I joined in 2025, we were focused on one hospital, which was a pioneering hospital, Addis Ababa Fistula Hospital. That really, the founders of it since passed away, but were pioneers in the field. And we were one of a handful of support organizations. So in some ways, I would say we were a tail on a dog, but that's a bad metaphor because it's a hospital, not an animal. But we were one of a number of organizations that supported this hospital. Then we went global in 2009. What does that mean? Well, there were only 2.8 of us because Terry only worked until 2, but there were, 3 of us. And so why did we go global? Well, the short answer is we were raising more money than this hospital could use. And, we could have helped them build an endowment, but that seemed like not the best use of resources because you've got women all over Africa that have this problem. Why would you endow for the future one hospital? So we went global. At that point, again, there were, 3 of us. We expanded gradually. Our first partner was Dr. Denny Mukwege, who's the founder of the Pansy Hospital, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018 for his pioneering work with that hospital, particularly treating women that were victims of sexual violence in that long-running conflict. But we moved forward. That first year, we had 4 partners, and we just, step by step, inch by inch over the last 15 years, raised more money. And we were raising about 10 times as much money as when I started. And probably more importantly, we're with that money doing about 35 times as many surgeries as we did in that first year going global, 2009. So we're achieving some, as they say in Silicon Valley, is where we're located, kind of economies of scale.
Wow. I mean, we get to talk about your original background in advertising, but I'm pretty sure you brought some skills, some knowledge with you to really build this incredible enterprise that you are leading at the moment. You can't call it officially an enterprise, obviously. Talking about fundraising, what's your secret to success with regards to the fundraising? How do you go about it?
Well, that, like I said earlier about it being built over time, if you look at a chart other than the pandemic where there was a drop year over year, and in 2008, well, just before I went global with the global recession, it's really been a steady curve up. So there hasn't been 1 year where we just tripled our revenue. It's been this kind of steady growth year over year. And people ask that. It's a really good question. I get that question from nonprofits because one of the hardest things to do is raise money.
Yeah.
And I would say it's just dogged. We realize too that those of us that are in the US, that's our biggest role. I'm not a surgeon, right? I'm not out in the village finding a patient. Our job is to attract supporters and to do that as efficiently as we can, because every dollar we spend in the US on us is a dollar that doesn't get into a doctor's hand to treat a woman. So I would say my private sector background makes me ruthless for good. No, I shouldn't say that ruthless. Maybe more like just extraordinarily thrifty about, we hire, it's not that we cheap out on salaries or benefits. I don't mean that thrifty, but we get really good people and and have a focus on results. And it's funny. I think that, obviously the for-profit sector, the bottom line, the Adam Smith invisible hand of profit drives efficiency. I would say with the foundation, obviously we're a nonprofit, so we don't have a profit. But the thing that drives us, the organizing principle, is the number of high quality surgeries we can get done. And if somebody wants to spend money on something at the foundation, that isn't already sort of in our plans, they better have a pretty good idea for how we want to do something. With something somebody wants to do will help us bring in more supporters to drive more surgeries. Now we try things. It's not like we get success in everything. We're iterative and make mistakes and learn.
Mm.
But I would say that's it. And I guess the other thing, like I said, probably the thing that's made us successful with fundraising is partly based on strategy, which is we kind of have blinders on, Kathleen, about not being all things to all people.
Yeah.
The Fistula Foundation, we fund surgeries. And that sounds sort of like, well, duh, but there's a lot of things that are adjacent to fistula that are very compelling. I mean, for instance, at the beginning, we got proposals to fund midwifery training because a good midwife can help save a mother and a baby and, prevent a fistula. Why wouldn't we do that? Well, because that it's very hard to prove outcome against fistula. You could do a lot of other good things. I'm not saying that people shouldn't fund midwifery training, but we made a strategic decision to just do this one thing and then be able to measure outcomes, also get very good at one thing. And I think that's been a piece of the success. It's hard sometimes to have those blinders on because, particularly with the implosion of USAID, there's things that I think have value in the world for women and families, like family planning, which allows women to plan and space children so that children are healthier, the moms are healthier. There's things that are adjacent to helping with good outcomes with deliveries, and we don't do those things. And in some ways, that's hard. It's a hard thing to say no to good people doing good things. I say all the time, we're not the Good Things Foundation or the Fistula Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that's one of the reasons we've been successful.
And I assume, that gets you and remains you focused. And there is this saying that states, where your energy goes, that's something that grows. And I think that's what you want to do. You want to affect, in the most positive sense, more and more women and have these, how do you call it?
Yeah, and that's
surgeries.
in the book that we, brought us together initially, this No Woman Left Behind that just came out last month. It's about the Fistula Foundation. There's a chapter in there, and this is kind of crude for some people's ears, but it's called Smile Train of Vaginas. And again, vagina is just a body part. Why should we blush when we talk about it?
Agreed.
We shouldn't. Smile Train, as you maybe know, is an extremely successful charity that does cleft palate surgeries. Their name is Smile Train, and that's what they do. And so why did I use that term? Well, we do surgery too. We just do it on a different body part and to achieve some efficiency. Like Smile Train doesn't say, oh, we're going to be doing literacy programs because a lot of these kids are poor and they don't know how to read. They say, we're going to do this. And I said, that's kind of what we want to do. Yeah. It just provides discipline. So in the international development space, having studied it in graduate school, there's a lot of sort of theories of change. If you do this and this and this, and maybe this will happen. Sometimes what gets lost in there is actually what happens. People measure sort of inputs of we did all this stuff, and it's too complicated to know if it really works. And I'm like, that's not satisfying to me. If we're going to do something, I want to make sure that it actually produces an outcome that is beyond just me collecting a paycheck and feeling good about what I do. How's it actually helping poor people? So
how do you actually work together? You work with so many people who are experts in their field. You mentioned a few times, I'm not the one doing the surgery, right? You have some good people there doing that.
We do actually. I'm kind of a generalist, barely jack of all trades, definitely ace of none. But on the medical side, from the beginning, we have relied on experts. Now we have 7 medical advisors. These are not people that work with us full time, mostly because since we don't do surgeries in our office, I don't need doctors in the office full time, but they advise us on the grants that we give to these, 170 partners. Yeah, those are 7 fistula, expert surgeons. We also have 2 people on our board, one that ran the UNFPA program on fistula, and then FIGO, which is the French acronym for the International Federation. So Federation Internationale of Gynecology and Obstetrics. So that plus a fistula surgeon from Kenya, there's 2 women that are on our board also help advise us and review our grants. So we have people, and we've got 4 people on our team with masters in public health that also have a role in looking at grants. So the grants are basically just how we deliver money to all of these hospitals and what the hospitals do. Then they get money from us basically quarterly, depending on what it is they've been able to report, doing, against the grants. And grants, it's a nice word, but it's basically a contract. Here's what you said you were going to do, and are you doing it? And we'll continue to pay you as you're doing it. But so humble to what we don't know. But again, back to it, we don't in our office do these surgeries. We're not a research institution or something like that where I would need to have a whole bunch of people with advanced academic training on our staff, because the real change happens in those far-flung operating rooms. And our goal is to get resources as quickly as we can to people that are doing high quality surgery. That's the other thing about how we've funded people. You're asking at the beginning, since we've been at this now 15 plus years, 16, funding globally, is this is still a requirement, which is like those first 4 partners. We got down into the weeds of who's actually scrubbed in with your surgeon who can speak to their ability to treat this injury. Not that they've got a degree and maybe they haven't practiced or, or whatever, but who actually can say that they, have been trained appropriately. And the same hospital in Ethiopia that I was mentioning at the outset, that was our primary partner for 4 years, Addis Ababa Fistula House, was a sort of center of excellence for surgeon training. And I think the first year, 3 at least, when we only did some capacity building, so the 3 surgeons we funded had been trained there. That's important, right? Because the surgery is intricate, and you're not going to learn how to do it over a weekend. And an overly confident surgeon can actually harm a woman. There's a joke about surgeons that's somewhat cynical, but what's the difference between God and a surgeon? God doesn't think he's a surgeon. It's just, and you don't want an overly confident but poorly trained or not trained enough surgeon operating on a woman, because you can actually do more harm than good. So that was a piece of it. And as we've moved forward and grown, that's still a core thing that we, evaluate, which is the people that are actually going to be doing the surgery. Where did they train? Who's seen them do the work? How do we ensure that those vulnerable women get high quality surgery?
Now, you use the term high quality surgery frequently. And now there's this curious me that says, how do you measure high quality surgery? Is it fixed? Is it not fixed?
I would say it's partly the nature of the training of the person that's doing the surgery. And part of the reason I emphasize it is in the US, and I don't know about Canada, but in the US, if you were treated by a surgeon who was poorly trained and you were injured, you could sue. There's huge suits, sometimes malpractice suits. There's attorneys that will gladly defend you and take a chunk of your winnings, if you will, at the end of a malpractice suit. But there are avenues for you to pursue damages if you've been injured. Now, a woman who's potentially extremely poor, based on that being one of the reasons she got this to begin with, if she ends up leaving the operating room in worse shape than she walked in, she might not even know. It's just like, well, it wasn't successful. Maybe it wasn't successful because somebody who didn't know what they're doing tried to fix you, but you won't have a way to figure that out. So we're very aware that the patient population is vulnerable going in. And if somebody did mistreat them, there's almost, no recourse for them that seems plausible. So that we think then the onus is on us to make sure that the person that's doing the surgery is well-trained, knows what they're doing. We do track, we've got a very powerful data platform built by people far smarter than I'll ever be about such things. We customize our own Salesforce platform, and then I call it the 2.0, even a better version of that has 100,000 patient records, and you can drill down into it by time frame and country and how much we spend on outreach. It's really quite amazing. Obviously, we look at surgery outcomes. We have patient logs for every patient we've treated. That said, you can't just say, was the surgery successful or not, and say that indicates high quality, partly because not to get too into the surgical weeds here, but there's a variety of sort of a range of injury, and some of the more significantly injured women, what does that look like? More of her bladder's gone, or there's collateral damage to her urethra or something that makes maybe a cure harder to get. So just because she isn't cured doesn't mean she got bad treatment, if that makes any sense. So we have to look discerningly at what's happening. That's where the medical advisors come in, because I don't have the training at all. I'm not a doctor to look discerningly at those outcomes.
I'm so curious about this, Pat. However, this podcast is called Legendary Leaders. I also want to delve into more of the leadership side with you.
Okay, please.
And I remember you mentioning to me that when you were about to write the book, you were initially thinking about a how-to book.
Yeah.
And it didn't quite turn into a how-to book. It's a
No,
memoir and has been best-selling book on Amazon in the autobiographies, I believe, as
yeah,
well.
it's doing well. It was the first week it was out and it came back to earth, but the first week it was out, it was on the USA Today bestseller list. But I mean, it's not there anymore because you get a big push the first week as people got to buy it.
Yeah.
Pre-orders and things like that. But yeah, I thought, well, the foundation's been successful. What lessons could I pass on? And I started writing that. I had this interesting, I thought it was so clever, sort of a sort of conventional wisdom, unvarnished truth of ways to manage things. And then it just seemed boring. Honestly, I thought and I wasn't sure that all the lessons I had would apply to other situations. And so then I switched gears. I set that aside and then decided to write a memoir. And most of it is storytelling because I think, if you think about how people learn, I mean, you think about any good reporter, usually they start with a story about an issue before they delve into the data. And so I thought, well, I'm going to tell stories about patients, about doctors, about donors. And because it's a memoir, some of the beginning part of it is about how I got on the path to leadership. I'm proud of what I've accomplished as a leader, but this isn't like a hero's journey for me. Who wants to read that? I joked, my parents, but they're dead. No, they are unfortunately dead. But so it's to give others a sense of what it might take to build something, and not that every lesson I've learned translates to someplace else, but here's my path.
And the book title is beautiful, No Women Left Behind. Now, that's a big mission. What does it relate to, apart from women suffering from fistula? What else does it refer to?
Well, I guess, it comes from at least the iteration of the word, or the derivation is, or the phrase rather, is like no man left behind. At least my understanding is from the US, and maybe not just the US military, but somebody injured in the field of battle, they, risk life and limb to make sure they get their buddy out. And they was also used in the US, child left behind a while, 2 decades ago, for like literacy and education. And so I'm kind of stealing it in a way. Nobody'd used it with regard to women. Obviously, as you mentioned, Kathleen, I mean, the women are often left behind. That's, they just are demonized and stuck in a hut, and like, you're just going to be that way, and I thought, no, we want to make sure they're not left behind. I guess the broader sort of cast on it, and this is really broad, is maybe my own journey, which was, it wasn't like I was left behind, but I spent my 20s in advertising, and that really was a path that I didn't want to stay on. And so, I didn't want to be left behind in the private sector in a way, and sort of pursued my own path. But the bigger reason for the book is the patients we're treating, not people like me that are comparatively very privileged to the women that we're in business to serve.
And yet, before we talk about some other challenges many women experience still today, maybe not as much or differently perhaps nowadays, this time in your 20s is really important. There's this big subtitle when somebody reads about you, from Madison Avenue to leading a nonprofit, and it's like, wow, what happened there? So tell us a little bit about your journey, because it wasn't just, oh, you know what, I'm going to leave this world, this private sector.
No, it's not. I mean, it's sort of in a nutshell. I started in advertising at 21. I was just a brand new college graduate. I didn't know what I wanted to do. It just almost was luck that I ended up there. It just sounded like more fun than accounting or finance. That was really it. So it wasn't a very well-chosen path. It was fun, though. Advertising's fun. It moves very quickly. I mean, this was, in the 80s when there was a lot of television advertising. I worked at big agencies. Get to go on television shoots for commercials and blah, blah. So what was the thing that changed things? Well, because I'd worked, helped pay for college. I'd always had jobs. I hadn't done the study abroad or travel through Europe. I just didn't have those experiences. And about 26, 27, I thought, I want to see the world. So a friend of mine, I said, let's go around the world. Let's get a leave of absence from work. So that was the change for me. But just to be clear, I did not set out to travel the world with the idea that I was going to try to save a piece of it or tackle any part of global poverty. No, I said, cue that song, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. I just wanted to see the world. This was not any sort of, I want to do anything to address global poverty. And Europe, Europe was fun. I was gone for almost 7 months. We spent about half the time in Europe and then landed in India, and then the world changed dramatically. I mean, India in the, mid to late 80s, it was 1986. It was a very different place. I mean, it's still poor, but it was a lot poorer back then. And from there, we went to Nepal, and what was in Burma is now Myanmar and Indonesia. And day in and day out, we were living on a tight budget. So we weren't staying in the places with rich foreigners. We were staying with, Indians and, Indonesians or whatever. And you get a sense the poverty, I mean, not grinding exactly, like people are starving in the streets, but things that as a middle-class American person, you just take for granted: hot and cold running water. Again, back to water you can drink out of a tap, a public school that's decent. I mean, at university, when I went in California, it's not the case anymore, unfortunately, but was free. If you get in, I went to Berkeley, it was free. I mean, there's things I just took for granted. And then you see people struggling kind of every day to get things that you just took for granted. You see kids without shoes. Now, I didn't have a whole closet full of shoes. I had school shoes and church shoes, maybe like play shoes for like sports. But I mean, it wasn't like I was not from a rich family, but then you see kids without shoes, and you see dwellings with dirt floors, and you see no clean water. You see things day in and day out. And then I come back to advertising, where you're trying to use, I would say, it's not the dark arts exactly, but it's close, sophisticated research to try to hack into your psyche to make you feel better about buying Coke versus Pepsi, or make you feel better about buying Levi's jeans instead of Wranglers. And you realize that you're using your creativity and your mind to get people to have an emotional attachment to a branded product. And that was a come to Jesus, but it was definitely a reckoning, and it didn't happen immediately. I'd love to say like I just came back and like I'm going to go save the world. I'm not like Mother Teresa or Greta Thunberg or anybody like that. It took me a couple years to finally go like, I can't do this with my one and only life. I cannot get up every day and pretend that I care about whether somebody buys this branded product over that branded product, because I really don't. And once you reach that conclusion, the money that goes with it, which was nice. I wasn't raised with plenty. It was nice to make money. I can't say that I didn't like the money, but it wasn't enough. So I blew it up. I went back to graduate school because I realized I had such a narrow skill set. What am I going to do? How am I going to use this to help make the world better? So I went back to graduate school. Ironically, now I sort of lean into the advertising experience to help me run the organization like a business. But obviously that business isn't about selling Coke or McDonald's or something like I'd worked on before. It's got a very different mission.
And I can imagine that your sales process, in inverted commas, is far more impactful nowadays because there's more heart behind it.
Yeah, it is. But it's interesting because the things that I lean into, it's sort of basics, but we are feeling creatures that think, not the other way around. And so we do lead with the heart in the kind of appeals we put together. Now we've got, as they say, the receipts. Like I said, a more sophisticated funder wants to drill into our database, wants to look at our revenue, wants to look at our, results and how we drive outcomes. I can share that with them. Someone wants to get in the sort of rigorous analytical weeds with us, and we can demonstrate how we use money well. That's great. But for a lot of what we do, it's much more, it's this, you use your brain to inform your storytelling, but it's really, you're trying to get somebody's heart engaged, because that's where people start. No matter what they tell you, the heart is what moves people to action. So I do draw on that. I draw on the experience a lot. It took me a while to realize that, actually, because I think to leave advertising, I had to paint it all black as this kind of soulless endeavor. There is parts of it that I think are soulless, but I do use those skills a lot, actually.
Well, hats off to you. I think if I think back to my 20s, I'm like, I don't know if I would have had the guts just to say, you know what, I'm going to change something. I'm going to move in a different direction.
Yeah. Well, I wrote about this in the book because, again, just to be honest about what happened. I mean, I came back and I had this kind of growing sense of maybe I don't want to do this, but I fell in love with a guy that worked at the agency, a few years older. I ended up sort of looking up to him. I joked in the book, 3 words that seemed to be, or 5 or whatever it is. I don't know. What do you think? Because it seemed to be my mantra for a while, and I just kind of listened to him. Don't women sometimes give over agency to a man? And, he was very invested in this business, was good at it. He was more on the creative side than I was. And it was actually, and I write about this in the book, it was finding out that he was being unfaithful to me combined with the San Francisco earthquake. It was those things that cracked my life open. So this wasn't like, maybe there are people that do this. They go like, oh, I see all this poverty. How could I sell stuff? I'm going to go save the world and start a charity. Now, there are people that do that. Good for them. I wasn't that noble.
Yeah.
I came back. I still worked in advertising with a growing sense of disquiet. I think I thought maybe I would marry my future. That kept me from having to pursue my own path. Oh, this man I've fallen in love with, like, we'll have a life together, and then I don't have to figure my own out. And it was the infidelity and this earthquake at the same time. It was an earthquake just through some logistics, how I found out because he was out of town, found out about something I didn't know about. But again, I don't mean to paint him as the bad guy. In some ways, I was in that situation trying to pretend in some ways I was something I wasn't quite, very into this superficial, fashion-driven advertising world. And I really was trying to make myself into something I wasn't. So I don't even want to blame him for not being faithful to me. I was being in some ways not faithful to myself because what you said, that was very scary. Wait a second. I've been on this ladder then at that point almost 10 years. I'm going to get off of this. Wait a second. I make good money. I've got an office with the secretary and a view of the bay. And what am I going to do on global poverty anyway? Just quiet that voice down. Just shut it up. And then finally, like my world started cracks. And, what came out of that was a new path. I could completely relate to what you said. I didn't come back and say, oh, I'm going to blow this up and start a charity. I mean, no. I am also somewhat more of a little bit of a planner. Like, okay, I'm going to go back and get to graduate school. I didn't just go like, oh, I'm going to start a charity out of nowhere. I was much more of a planner. And even this job, I didn't immediately get out of graduate school and like found the Fistula Foundation. There were a bunch of, and I write about this in the book, sort of dead ends and I thought, somebody reading it and looking at, where's my path, that maybe they see too. Gosh, well, Kate ended up someplace where she was really happy and ended up being leading in the foundation to some pretty amazing success. But that didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't like, oh, it's just like you land right out of graduate school, perfect job. No, there were several jobs that were just not good fits. And so, I mean, I spent a few pages here and there talking about who wants to read my career journey. But mostly what I wanted to convey was it isn't just going to be like, oh, you just skip into the sunlight and it's, roses and lollipops and it's all works out. It's not that. It's more fraught than that. Or it can be, at least it was for me.
Yes, you are writing about it. And yet for those of the listeners here who say, oh, you know what, I am at this point of time where I feel like something has got to change and I'm experimenting. How and when did you know this is what I want to do?
Well, what I would say for me, it was more of think about like a light, like not a light switch that goes off and off, but like a dimmer where it just gradually gets more light over time. I would say that. I've advised some people have asked about that, like, what do you do? One, I wouldn't be able to tell somebody else what their path should be at all because it's very singular and it's, I would say give your little voice a mic, that little voice that says, I don't really want to be here anymore. Shut up. What else are you going to do? I don't know, but let's figure it out. So what does let's figure it out look like? Well, what kind of issues what are you drawn to? And only you know that. What kind of if you want to do something that has more meaning, are there issues, are there populations you're drawn to? You might start having conversations with people, like I'm gonna say informational interviews, like you're out for a job, but explore who's doing things that you think, like who's got jobs or roles where you think like I'd kind of like to be them. Maybe I don't have the training yet or the confidence or the skills, but most people, when you reach out and want to have a conversation, if you don't want anything other than their wisdom and expertise, and you don't aim for like Michelle Obama or somebody, but somebody that's more reasonable in your own network, most people say yes, or a friend of a friend. So you start expanding, the light starts going on as you sort of have a better sense of who does what it took them to get there, what they like about their jobs. You might think about I did this, I wrote about it briefly in the book. I went over and saw a career counselor. I mean, I didn't go through it because it would be too boring, but I did do a couple of tests, a couple of this, mostly to just sort of light a universe up where I might, where's going to be a warm spot for me in a world that's beyond what I'm doing right now. But it doesn't have to start with you're quitting your job and you're going back to graduate school, or you're going to quit a job and start something out of scratch. Who does that? That'd be really scary. It can start with just information and then listening to your own sort of heart and soul about what you're drawn to and take some pragmatic steps toward that.
Your story of traveling and returning and to some extent, even the unfaithful partner reminded me of one part in my 20s, my mid-20s. and work just felt, nah, I just didn't feel it anymore. I thought there must be something else, something more fulfilling. The boyfriend was unfaithful, and I went traveling. I didn't go traveling because of that. It just felt right, and I just followed that urge.
Great. Where did you go?
Oh, I didn't go too far away. I traveled South Africa and I traveled Ireland.
Oh, well, different hemispheres. Good for you.
Yes, it was so much fun. It was very simple, but absolutely brilliant. And I did exactly parts of what you just said, really tuning in, listening to me and my energy levels, but also having conversations along the way, because you meet people, you talk to them, you're curious about their lives and how they are living it, and you step into different cultures as well. And you see how other people live and what matters to them. I came back and I'm like, okay, something's got to change. And that was my path to leave my home country and moved eventually then to the UK. I never want to miss that. And I think it is very easy to fall into, oh, this happened to me and poor me, or something feels hard. And I think all of the hardships, and not all of the hardships, but there are certain hardships, certain challenges in life that are there to also test you and to open a new path for you. And that's how I perceive many of those kind of crossroads in the past now. And I'm utterly grateful for them.
Yeah. Well, good for you at that age for being sort of open to that. I do think sometimes people, whether it's family or their own socialization or conditioning, that shut down the voice that says, this isn't what I want. Well, you should want this. I mean, I had that voice. You should want this. Wait a second. This is what you wanted. What do you mean you now don't want it? But sometimes it's hard to know until you're in the middle of something. You can look at it from the outside and say, oh, that's what I want. And then you pursue it. But you might get there and then find out it's not what you want. And being true to yourself sometimes means, I think, listening to that voice when it's saying something part of you doesn't want to listen to. That's true of relationships too, What's weird about, the relationship is I always felt like I was trying to prove myself with him. Like I wrote about this a little bit in the book, and then it got to be too much of like not a rom-com, but something that felt too, sort of off topic. And the first draft had more of that. There was a constant sort of feeling of like trying to earn somehow that I was good enough, or that I was, my dresses were this, or my outfits were that, or my this, to sort of be who I think he wanted me to be. But I was subjecting myself to that, I can't blame him for that. I was very much an actor in my own drama here, if you will. But yeah, over time, it obviously didn't work. And that earthquake was a blessing too, in a way, because I lost my home, and that was hard, but it just opened up possibilities. It literally sort of cracked everything open.
Literally.
I don't know. I've thought sometimes, what if we had gotten married and he'd still been sort of unfaithful, and I'd been still sort of faking being something I want, I don't think that would have ended in a good place anyway. And again, I don't mean to make, he says somebody's unfaithful, it makes him be bad and I was good. And I actually wrote in the book, who could blame him for trying to be with somebody who wasn't pretending to be somebody they weren't. In a way, I wasn't sort of I wrote about this the first time I ever saw a therapist, and I'd sort of cast myself as this victim, at the beginning thing, like I'd been hit by a drunk driver, and you start unpacking it and go, maybe not, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, but so that's how I got started on this path long time ago, but here we are. Time's gone by fast.
Yeah. And if you look back, right, what you wanted then as a young woman versus what you want now and what success looks like for you nowadays, I assume that has changed. And you were talking about two things. You mentioned the greed is good 80s that you started out in, and you mentioned a quote that is all about, I wrote it down, hold on, about a toddler thinking. What was it? Wanting it all is toddler thinking.
Yeah, it's Ariel Levy, some quote that I have it at the beginning of a chapter. the idea that feminism is you can have it, the idea that you can have it all is not the thinking of a feminist, it's the thinking of a toddler. And I mean, I wrote it about a, chapter that we talked about partly the end of my marriage, but I do think sometimes there's this simplistic notion that feminism means that you can have it all. And I think
Mm.
like the reason that quote was sort of grabbed me, I obviously agreed with the sentiment, was I think we set ourselves up for failure if you think that you can do all of this. The idea that men were able to do all this, so we as women should be able to do all this. But a man in the 1950s didn't do, or 60s, whenever I had a stay at home wife. Often those people, at least upper middle class families, college educated families, often those men were working really hard with the total burden of providing, everything financially to keep the family going. Yes, he had a wife and kids, so you could say, well, they had it all. They had a wife and kids, and they had this business, or a business, or profession. But often they weren't spending that much time with their kids or their wife because the whole burden of financially was on them, and they died. I mean, statistically, died younger than women. So it wasn't even like they had it all. Yes, they had more access to resources and power. I'm not saying that, we should have kept it like that. But sometimes the idea that I see much more clearly now that my younger self didn't, you can't sort of, somebody said you can have it all, but not all at once. That sort of could ring true to me. But the idea that you could be, I think, I mean, even like a high powered CEO and be at the same time engaged on a day-to-day basis with, toddlers and young children. I mean, yes, you can pay for, 24-hour nanny care if you've got money. But there's only so much, attention and energy you have. And the idea that somehow magically you're going to have this sort of high performing job and also show up with the same amount of energy to parent, I think
Mm.
is just silly. It's just silly. I mean, there's two things take a lot of energy, and the idea that you're just going to be able to do it. I mean, yes, you can hire a lot of help, but then is maybe is your help raising your child because you're not there very much? I mean, it's possible, but it's not without trade-offs, I guess.
I'm fully with you, and I'm observing that on a regular basis as well, where I have also redefined success for me and content, and we could bring up many, many other words. What does it look like for you nowadays? What
Well, I
makes you
would say
feel truly
I wrote
content?
about this in the book a bit. Was that if you had told me in my 20s or teens or something that I would get married, be divorced, never get married again, and only have one child, I'd be like, oh my God, that's like a tragic ending. But I don't look at it that way. And maybe I'm trying to fool myself, but I love my son more than anything. And I've loved my work. He even refers sometimes to the foundation as like my second child. So the decision to put energy into those two things rather than, I dated some people in my 40s and 50s, but there just wasn't enough hours in the day. One of them said to me, I'm always going to be third after Bobby and the foundation. I thought, you're right. Because those two things I care about more than I care about you. Now, maybe I should have put him higher and, change, but it just didn't work. Now, I think sometimes with marriages, if it would be different, but somebody I was dating was never going to be the father to my son, was
Mm.
never going to care about him the way I would as a parent. It just, and so I made decisions about where I put my energy, and that can seem tragic, but I don't view it that way. I view it very much as a choice. If I wanted to get married and put marriage ahead of my career, I think I probably could have done that, but I didn't want to do that. My career was very satisfying to me, and many ways still is. So I think we all kind of make some choices and then live with those. Of course, I would have loved to have had definitely a supportive, positive marriage. And then I could have maybe had it all, like, work and child and marriage. But and maybe I'm fooling myself, but women that are my age, I'm in my 60s, the men that are our age were raised usually with very traditional models in their head growing up. Like in my neighborhood, middle class neighborhood, I knew nobody that was divorced. I knew no mothers that worked. It just wasn't, I mean, that women that worked were like nurses maybe, or a teacher or something, but it just didn't, very gender divided roles. And so even though women were going to college, my generation, the men we were dating, I mean, I look at most of the women I know that are my age, don't have relationships that feel as as sort of balanced, where both of them have had careers. It seems much more like, well, Dave's or Bill or whatever's career was it, and I sort of took off time, was a stay-at-home mom, and maybe do a little bit of this, and that the
Yeah.
burden, if you will, for sort of homemaking and child rearing was still somewhat gendered. Maybe not as completely as my mother's generation, but that there wasn't like, well, we both get to have careers and we're going to both make trade-offs. At least for my generation, that doesn't feel as normative. There's some interesting data, like out of the Harvard Business School, of women that graduated and how many of them, they're roughly my age, had ended up on some kind of a mommy track or even getting off a career track, even though they were trained to sort of work professionally. Now, maybe that's because I mean, assume it's because of what they wanted to do. I'm not sure where all that leads, except for, I guess, for me, success is being able to define what it is you want to do and then have the resources to make that happen. And it's so individual.
What about the future? How long are you planning to do everything you do for?
Yeah, well, Fistula Foundation, I'm going to be stepping down later this year, and that's been in the works for a while. I'm going to remain a senior advisor, but not running it. The one thing that's hard about being a CEO that's maybe different than being a lawyer or a veterinarian or whatever. I have friends that are in different professions, and they can just sort of scale it back. They can take on fewer clients or patients or whatever, and go to working 4 days a week or 3 days a week or whatever it is. Being a CEO, particularly in an expanding organization, it's pretty binary. You're either all in, or you're out. And I thought the time was right to turn it over. But I started a graduate program in counseling psychology about 3 years ago. I've only been doing like one course at a time, and actually, after my parents died, took about a year off. So I'm ending my first year, even 3 years in. But I'm starting full time in the fall. So that's my plan. And I'm not sure exactly what population of people I'll work with. A little bit like everything else in my life, I'm going to see what sort of speaks to me, but work's always been central. And I was a little worried, honestly, a few years ago, as I could see that, at some point I'm going to retire, and like, what does that look like? I have traveled all over the world. So some people when they retire, like, oh, I want to see the world, I want to travel. I mean, not that I never want to travel again, but I've had a lot of travel before this job and then with this job. And I started a burning desire to get on a long haul flight. But then, and I thought, I only have one child, so I'm not going to, like my mother, have this fleet of grandchildren to help take care of. So I thought I wanted another profession. And as a woman, I also was going to be an older woman. And I thought, what are professions where being an older woman, you're not going to be discriminated against because of your age? And if you go see a counselor, a marriage counselor, or some kind of a, psychologist, you don't really want to see a 25-year-old. I wouldn't, because like, how are they going to know about the challenges of marriage when they've never been married? I mean, they know from a textbook, but what else do they know? Or whatever the issue. And I thought that's something where you walk in, you see an older woman as a therapist. Depends on the issue, of course, but it's probably not an immediate strike against you. It's also something you can do that doesn't require as much physical energy. So you're not like, teaching school where you're on your feet for, 8 hours a day or something. That I thought that's something that I potentially could do if my health physically, well, and mentally too, if I'm able to maintain those, I could be a counselor into my 70s or 80s even, depending. And I don't at this point in my life need the income, and I could potentially, around where I live, there's a paucity of mental health people that take insurance, for instance. I mean, if you're well off, you can find Silicon Valley, you can find therapists. But if you're underinsured, good luck with that. A lot of therapists don't even take insurance. I mean, our healthcare system is a healthcare business, and if you see it through the lens of money, it makes sense. But I thought, if I don't need money, there's a whole population of people. I'd probably do some sliding scales for people to just show up for free, but almost whatever someone could afford to pay. And fill a need that seems to exist here. So that's my plan anyway. I mean, as they say always, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan. So who knows where I'll end up, but that's a plan at this point.
Oh man, I would love to be in a world where we don't even talk anymore about ageism and sexism. A woman of my age, I had to think about what I can still do. Where I spend most of my time, there is a growing thought process about how can we keep talented and capable individuals in the workforce for longer instead of just forcing them to retire, even if they don't want to, and they don't really need to, because we stay healthier longer nowadays. And, we should really, really make use of that there are people who are curious, who want to do more.
It's true. I mean, and there's the thing that's, and I don't know if this is true where you are, but it's true here. If you look at the data, one of the more discouraged sort of demographics in terms of job searching are 55 plus people, because you lose your job, and there's the ageism and sexism is so rampant that their period of unemployment is longer, and they end up sometimes being in the discouraged, long-term unemployed, which I get, because they're I mean, I run an organization, I've been pretty successful with it. And in a weird kind of way, even with some of the younger people, I could sometimes feel this kind of, oh God, she's a boomer, she doesn't get this. And I'm like, I do, I just express it differently. I mean, it just is, it's what it is. I maybe was the same age, same way, in a different way when I was younger too. Yeah, it's sad because there's a lot of capability there that I think goes unused because of, the last taboo, ageism. Yeah, it's there. And it's, I don't know. It's so weird. We live in a society here that seems like it worships youth in a way that, I'd love to look and feel like I was 20 again, but the wisdom that people get as they grow older, it seems like there's a lack of appreciation or even seeking that out. It's like a waste to me,
and yet the beauty that I observe with you is that you don't just have this approach of one woman at a time. It's like one human being at the time. You impact people around you step by step and pass on these experiences, this knowledge, this different way of thinking. And I'm loving it. And I'm feeling really inspired by everything you do and who you are. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Kathleen. And if somebody listening to this gets something out of it, it's been time well spent. And I feel I'm lucky. I'm glad that we've met. And I've just enjoyed this immensely.
Yeah, same here. And I have two last questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, how can people find out about you, the Fistula Foundation, the book even?
Oh, that's easy. Well, it's sort of easy. Our website is fistulafoundation.org. That's just as it sounds, like fist, FISTULA, and then foundation.org. So, and actually right now on our homepage, there's links to information about the book that are at the top of the page. So it's really easy to find. If you're not lucky there, you could go on either, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, or Amazon, which obviously everybody gets Amazon. These are most people do, and just put in "No Woman Left Behind." There is one book that's got the same title, but mine has two African women on the cover, and my name, obviously, Grant, as I say, better than Lone, like for college students. But anyway, yeah, so you could go there and learn more about the book. 100% of the profits for the book go to the foundation. So while I wrote it, any money that we make off the book is, comes right back to fund surgeries for women. So that's what we do. And again, I tried to make this, so for the book, you mentioned kindly at the beginning, and people can read the reviews on our website. And we've also recorded conversations I have with Nick Kristof at the New York Times. Later this week, I'm talking to Denny Mukwege, as I mentioned a while ago in this discussion, won the Nobel Peace Prize, one of our longest term partners. So you can access those interviews. But I wrote the book to raise awareness of what we do and why we do it. And the reviews have been very encouraging. I'm a first-time writer, but I'm not a total fool. So I had a few really good editors, including somebody I didn't know at the time because I just reached out to him out of nowhere. But because he'd helped with another book I liked, but a guy that works for a Hollywood screenwriter. He gave me 4 days and cut about 50 pages from my book. He didn't cut them. He just told me where it was. Be worthless. Tell me where it's boring. So I think that the book that exists now, I say this with humility, but I think it's a pretty good read. And my hope is people will read it.
And we are going to publish all the links, obviously, in the show notes as well, so that we can encourage more and more people to be inspired, to learn a lot, and to do something good for all these
Yeah.
women that we don't want to leave behind. So thank you for everything you do together
Well,
with your partners and team.
well, thanks for spreading the word with this. I appreciate it.
I said I have two questions for you. The second one is, I think, quick, because you gave us already so many top tips, so much advice and insight here. But if you were to mentor your younger self now, or if you were her therapist once you have finished your course,
Here we go.
what would be one piece of insight or advice that you would leave with her?
Well, this sort of reiterates a theme that's been throughout this conversation, which is, listen to your own little voice and give it a microphone. That, and later in life, I became a meditator, which sounded a little woo-woo flaky to me, but it's really just the stillness, so that the voices that you hear from your friends, your parents, your spouse, whatever it is, that you can quiet that and just listen to that little voice that really says, I really want to be with this person, or I don't want to be with this person, or I really like this, or I really, gosh, this isn't working. I'm having to pretend to be something. Whatever it is. I think times it's really hard, particularly when you're younger, to separate voices that you were raised listening to, societies, your parents, your classmates, and listen to your own voice. So that's probably the advice I would give, because if you can get used to doing that, that voice can be, as long as you train it to be kind to you, can also be your great effective critic. I had somebody a long time ago tell me this, and I think this is true, that he said, I don't need an external person telling me when I messed up, because I know, about, like, you do a presentation, it doesn't land, you write something, it's not very good. And he said, I've just over time really given that critic, that internal critic, a voice. You don't want it to be the total voice, because then you end up with some other issues. But I've tried to do that. Like, here's a small example that maybe would be helpful is, when I get a problem now that's happened, like a personnel issue that's come up with a team, or something that's underdelivered, somehow something's happened. What I try to say to myself at the beginning is, I created the whole problem. Now, okay, that's maybe making me a martyr, but in a weird sort of way, rather than making yourself the victim, if you say, I did this to myself, I somehow brought this person, this situation, this something, then you empower yourself to figure out, what did I not see? Where was my judgment off? Where was I somehow wishful or not comprehending, or did I rush through something, or did I not see it as being whatever, as difficult a situation as it was? If you sort of say that you created it all, you become an agent for learning and fixing. And so but trying to get that voice right, I'd say that's one of the things I struggle with. You don't want to have an interior critic that just pounds on you that you're not good enough, that you're continually screwing up. But obviously, you don't want the internal voice to be a narcissist either, that you never make any mistakes and it's all somebody else's fault. But between the two, I would much rather have the internal critic that says, I did something wrong. I made, as opposed to, this person is, therefore, I didn't really do anything wrong because they're bad, stupid, whatever, mean, something, like it's all them. No, if you say it's all me, you empower yourself. That also is probably one of the things I would say, is assume that you did something that brought this to you. Yeah. And don't make it that you're bad. Look at it as learning.
Thank you so much. I'm hesitant to comment too much on it, and we go into the next hour of our conversation. So therefore, I'm going to say, thank you so, so much. And thank you for your clarity, your courage, for your compassion, everything you do. As I said 3 times now, I say it again. You are a real inspiration, Kate. And I'm so, so delighted that I had the honor to meet you here today. Thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure from beginning to end. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you. And for everybody out there, don't just let us know what you made of this conversation, what you took away. We went quite medical here today, didn't we? No, let us know how this conversation has helped you personally in shaping your path moving forward, for example. Perhaps making different choices that you were thinking about already from time to time. I'm really curious, I'm sure so is Kate. And if you want and need any support, do let us know. But get the book now and help this really important cause. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.